Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session. And I will be first introducing Foundation and the group, and then move on to the chair speaker as well as the discussants. The Foundation for Creative Social Research, FCSR, is a discursive platform for interaction among academics, writers, artists, poets, social activists, and policy makers. It intends to bridge the gap between intellectuals and common people in the society. For this purpose, the Foundation initiates a series of dialogues on various issues of contemporary relevance and among people from different walks of life. Through these dialogues, the Foundation aims at influencing the process of knowledge production and dissemination. It emphasizes the needs of shifting the terms of knowledge discourse by questioning all the established universals. It also argues for accepting the emergentist nature of knowledge, so the experiences of different times and spaces could be accommodated in the construction of ever-evolving universals. Our knowledge and practice group was conceptualized in 2003 to create a blueprint of text and practice specific to various traditions and societies. There has been a continued engagement between the members of the group and the varied practicing communities of respective knowledge traditions across different parts of India. For example, Nyaya and Mimamsa tradition of Mithila, Tantric tradition of Mayong, Assam, Sufi tradition on the lane between Afghanistan and India, Panch Kosi Mela in Buxar region, and Navvinay tradition in Bengal. Our chair for this session is Dr. Raghavendra Pratap Singh. He's a professor at Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. He has to his credit 20 books and over 180 articles published in different peer-reviewed journals in India and abroad. He has visited and developed lectures at different universities, for instance, Harvard, Massachusetts, Frankfurt University, and so on and so forth. His specialization includes German idealism, postmodernity, consciousness, Indian and Western perspectives, studies in ethics, civilization and cultural studies, Upanishads, Vedanta, Buddhism, human rights, multiculturalism, globalization, and philosophy of education. Our speaker for this session is Professor Bharat Jhunjhunwala. He was a former professor of economics at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He holds his PhD in food and resource economics from University of Florida. He has presented papers in the Journal of Indo-Judicial Studies, USA, Philosophical Investigation, Iran, International Journal of Theology, Philosophy and Science, Romania, South Asian History, Culture and Archaeology, India, Journal of Archaeological Studies in India, Transactions of Indian Geographers, and other journals. Our discussants for this session, we have three discussions. Our first is Swami Shamya Chaitanya. He's a monk pursuing his spiritual calling in Rishikesh. He was a student of Hindu College, Delhi University, and started his professional career as a lecturer at the Delhi College of Arts and Commerce in the early 1990s. He switched several jobs and later worked with the World Bank for a decade. Dissatisfied, he called it a day and moved to Rishikesh and other scriptures with traditional acharyas. He spends his time studying, teaching, traveling, and counseling people in distress. Our second speaker, our discussion for this session is Dr. Saurabh Tudoria. He completed his MPhil and PhD from Center for Philosophy, JNU in 2016. He did his postdoc from National Institute of Advanced Studies, IISc Bangalore. He has been recently appointed as the adjunct faculty in the School of Humanities, NIS Bangalore. He has published in various journals and as well as various journals, both in national and international. He is currently editing the book volume on multidisciplinary perspectives on artificial intelligence and machine learning to be published by Springer in the coming year. His research includes phenomenology, embodiment, and Kashmiri chauvinism. Our last discussant for the session is Varun Vigmol. He is a PhD student at Center for Political Studies, School of Social Sciences, JNU. The area of his research, interest, and work include religion and politics, philosophy of mind, with special focus on consciousness studies and philosophy of religion. Thank you. I'll give the floor to the chair. Thank you.
So good evening to everybody, and thank you very much, Ms. Salja, for introducing the institute you represent, and also the theme which is of pertinent importance, that is Hindu cosmology in the light of modern psychology. A lot of debates are going on in this field, and this is very extremely important one. And I'm surprised to see that your foundation is doing such a marvelous job, about everything. It's such a nice institute, and I would definitely like to join and contribute in whatever way I can do it. So because we need such a kind of an institute to flourish or disseminate the knowledge system. So on my own behalf, I welcome all the first the speaker, Professor Jhunjhunwala. Of him, I had heard of it, and when I received his paper, very comprehensive paper of around 34 pages in print, it took 2 days for me to go through it. So, but very interesting paper, and I think I shared it with some of my colleagues also, and it's a very important theme he has taken up. And then we have the discussants, and that will go on, and participants are also there. So we have almost roughly 1.5 hours time to have this session. So first, maybe half an hour should go to the main speaker, Professor Jhunjhunwala, and then we'll have the discussants. And questions can also be given to me through in the chat bot, which I'll read it out off and on. And then let us see how it goes about. So with these few words, may I invite Professor Jhunjhunwala to come forward with his slides. I'm told he has PPTs and all that, and give the presentation. So over to you, Professor Jhunjhunwala.
While she's starting, you see the trigger for this entire exercise. First of all, thank you, Manindraji, Raghavendraji, and everyone for inviting me. The trigger for this entire study was the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and the famous discussion between Maitreyi and Yajnavalkya, where Maitreyi ultimately asks Yajnavalkya that what is the basis of Brahma? And Yajnavalkya then says that if you ask these questions, your head will break into pieces. मुझे नहीं समझ में आया कि ये प्रश्न पूछने से सर क्यों टूट जाएगा ये भाई. So I started, and from childhood मेरे को always I had a curiosity कि ये भगवान विष्णु को बोलते हैं कि हैं कहाँ रहते हैं, उनका फॉर्म क्या है ये. Okay, so that was the beginning of this study, and I'll now go straight into the presentation. One question in cosmology is that if we go to the singularity and the Big Bang, then what preceded it? Whether there was another universe before that, whether it was de novo creation as the Bible says, or whether it was a continuous creation in some form. So, as far as I can understand, the Rigveda says, we don't know. We just don't know. Whatever happened to, whatever existed before singularity, we don't know. And that is exactly what Stephen Hawking says, that science could not predict how the universe could have begun. So, there is a consonance that we can have various presumptions, various ideas, but it doesn't really tell us what was there when the singularity went into the Big Bang and the present universe was created. Next slide. So the question mark on the left indicates that we don't know what existed before. But then the term singularity and the term I am one are same or similar at least. When we say singularity, we are talking about one. And when the Hindu texts say that that I may become many, that implies that I was one. So the parallel here is that please shift, singularity and I am one, they are the same. And then when the singularity says that may become many, then it means becoming is there. The word becoming means the beginning of time in some sense. So this is how I see the parallel. In the Western science, the Big Bang was started by Georges Lemaitre in 1931, and he said that similarly that the one atom somehow exploded and that became the universe. The same concept we are finding in the Hindu text, that there was I am one and may I become many. Next slide. So now the Chandogya of course says that may I become many, that is clear. But Yoga Vasisht says this Brahma obtains growth in itself by itself. Now this is very important because it denies an external cause for the creation of universe. That is, it is self-creation. And the Western science has many theories, but I would rely every animal there is a sense of growth. So I would like to extrapolate it backwards, that if, as Jung says, that a corn grows into an oak, then why should we not assume that the singularity grows into the universe? So although this is a weak concordance, but I still think the set that from one you become many and you grow yourself. That is the parallel that we have here. Next slide. Now, here I am making a departure from the mainstream psychology. In the Hindu tradition, we say that all this is Brahma. Brahma is all pervasive. But in the Western theological world, this is monism there are different varieties of monism, but this is basically a monist approach, and that is supposed to be, or that is considered to be contra the monotheist approach. However, the panpsychism, I find that panpsychism is the closest to the Hindu concept, because what Philip Goff, who is I suppose the leading panpsychist, what he says is that every particle of the universe has consciousness. Now, all this is verily Brahma, and consciousness is a fundamental feature of all the physical world, are basically saying that everything that exists has consciousness. Now, I should make it clear that I am not espousing an external agent as God. What I am saying is that the God is the result of this consciousness of all universe. We'll go to that in the next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Now, this is my main slide really. On the left hand side, we have the singularity marked 1. This is singularity. Brahma jab vah ek tha, when the Brahma was alone. Now, the way I think is that Brahma had some consciousness and some matter. So, what happened in the creation when Brahma said ki main ek hu anek ho jaun, so there was a division in all the particles. So Brahma mein jo billions particles stay, they all separated, and these are mentioned as M, the gray circles marked M. That is the matter. And each of these particles had some consciousness which is marked as C above it. So when Brahma became many, all the particles within the Brahma separated, and each one of them had its own consciousness. Now the second part is that this consciousness, the C, the 5C that you see on the middle or above the M, The way I think is that these consciousness fused into each other. They interacted with each other like a World Wide Web or something. I don't know what was the method of the interaction, but the fusion of this consciousness, the billions, not billion, infinite number of particles, infinite numbers of consciousness, not numbers, infinite subsets of consciousness, they fused together, and this became what I am suggesting, that this is Brahma. Now the crucial point is that I am postulating that singularity, we can call it Brahma or we can call it Viraj. That is, I'm not clear what the singularity should be called, whether it should be called Viraj, Viraj meaning the matter aspect, or it should be called Brahman, the psychic aspect. But irrespective of how it was created, the fusion of consciousness led to the creation of Brahman, or became Brahman, or is called Brahman. We don't have to use the word creation. Created Brahman, but or maybe it recreated. Maybe the consciousness that was within the singularity now broke into parts and then fused into making of the Brahman. So now we have two things. We have Brahma, which is the fused consciousness, which is marked on the top with the number 4, and we have the infinite number of particles M, which are marked 2 at the bottom of the slide. Now here starts the interaction. The Brahma, the collective consciousness of the infinite number of particles, begins to interact with the individual consciousness of the particles. So the distinction between Viraj and Brahman is that Brahma is fused, whereas Viraj is separate but infinite particles. So what happens is that Brahma, the collective, to give a very crude example, the Prime Minister is kind of a fused consciousness of all the voters, and the Prime Minister interacts with each of the voters. Something similar, the Brahma consciousness interacts with each of the constituent particles, which are called Viraj. I am using the word Viraj in the sense of a collective name of the infinite numbers of separate articles, whereas Brahma is the collective name for the fused consciousness of the infinite articles. Now you see, Rigved says, from him Viraj was born, and again Purusha was from Viraj was born. So I am personally not very clear, and I'm happy to hear, get any suggestions or guidance or whatever, that this verse seems to say that Brahma and Viraj are born from each other. Now, if we call the singularity as Brahma, then Viraj is born from Brahma. If we call the singularity as Brahma, then the Viraj is again born from Brahma. But if we consider the singularity to be matter and the M to be the primary, then Brahma is created from Viraj. So, to my mind, I am personally not very clear, but I can see, I'm not very clear which came first. Perhaps both, perhaps it was simultaneously, I don't know. But this much is clear, that the two are in interaction, and that is what we are interested in. Now, the same idea is mentioned by the panpsychist, not panpsychist exactly, Giulio Tononi, who's a neuropsychologist, I think, and he says that the as if they were transistors, and the sum equal to more than their parts. The sum being the parts is exactly Brahma, concept of the fusion of the consciousness of the particles into Brahma. So the consciousness of the infinite particles, the C separate, when it fuses, it becomes Brahma, and that is what is, I think, agreeable to at least the panpsychists who followed. There are shades and variations within panpsychists also, but this much is, I think, similar, that they agreed that the fusion leads to something more than the parts, and this more is Brahma. Next slide, please. Now, Atharva Ved, I like this hymn from the Atharva Ved, which again talks about the ascend and descend. Viraj was verily this universe, which is fine. She ascended, she descended in the householder's fire. She ascended and descended in the fire of offering. Ascended, descended in the southern fire, in the assembly, in the gathering. She ascended, descended in the address. Now, what is this ascendance and descendance? The way I see is, and please note that the beginning is Viraj. Viraj was this in the beginning. So we have both statements in our text. Viraj was there in the beginning, or Brahma was there in the beginning. But this ascendance and descendance seems to me to be parallel to the interaction that I just mentioned, that the constituent parts are ascending to the collective, and the collective is descending into the constituent parts. So again, to the good example, the Prime Minister and the order. So we have a continuous up and down. I tried to look for commentaries on this verse, but unfortunately, at least I could not find any commentary other than translation. So this is how I am interpreting this. Next. Now, the fusion of consciousness, I've already mentioned about Giulio Tononi. Emil Durkheim, who is a sociologist, he says that society is a collective ideas, beliefs, and sentiments that is produced from the fusion of individual consciousness. Now, again, we have the same idea. Here, the word society, to my mind, parallels this more than the sum of Tononi, and it parallels in the larger sense Brahma. I'll come to the subcomponents of it, sub-parts of it, but the basic idea that the society is created by fusion is very much there in the sociological thought, and this is important because here we are talking about the fusion of consciousness of human beings. Next slide. Now you see, the collective, we have so far, I have mentioned that there is a fusion of consciousness. Now we can see this fusion, consider this fusion at multiple levels. We have, let us say there are 10 persons standing in a room. Their consciousness can fuse and they can make a leader amongst themselves or have a joint thing. Jaise bhajan karte hain, to all of us, all the people who are doing bhajan, they develop a kind of a unity in their mind. So this collective, I am using the word collective and universal very specifically. Collective I am using for a subset of the universe, and universe I am using for the infinite universe. So the fusion of consciousness occurs both at the collective and the universal level. So we can think of the consciousness of the entire, all the human beings in the world reflected in some person, to take a crude example, maybe the Secretary General of the United Nations or something of that type. But there are parts. So you have a collective consciousness of India, you have a collective consciousness of Uttar Pradesh, you have a collective consciousness of JNU, you have a collective consciousness of the Department of Philosophy of JNU, you have a collective consciousness of a class in the philosophy of JNU. So we have large number of collective consciousness in layers, one above the other. Now, when this reaches the universal, when all these collective consciousness in turn fuse with each other, we get what I am calling the universal consciousness. Now I am using the word consciousness to include the mind and the unconscious, and or the conscious and the unconscious. So Conscious means mind. That's how I'm using the word. Unconscious is, of course, unconscious. And consciousness is the combined mind and consciousness. Next slide. Now, this is a very crucial verse, please. This is a very crucial verse from Brihadaranyaka. You see what Vedanta, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Vedanta asked Yajnavalkya, how many gods are there? So first, Yajnavalkya said 33, then he said 6, and among them, fire, earth, air, sky, sun, heaven. Then he said 3, then he said 2, matter and vital breath, then 1.5, air that blows, and lastly 1, and then he said this is Brahma. Now this is exactly what I'm saying. The 33 devtas, gods or devtas, are the innumerable collective consciousnesses, which here it begins with 33, but there is no reason why it cannot be 3300 or 33 crore as it is often said. So what we are having here is that when the consciousness of all universe, including sand, water, sun, ether, sky, human beings, animals, plants, when the consciousness of all of this universe fuses, then we get one Brahma. And below that, we have large numbers of subsets, as Yajnavalkya is saying, that it leads to different devtas. So from this I am deriving the idea that devta is actually the collective consciousness of a subset of the universe. That's all. What is the subset? There can of course be infinite number of subsets, so there can be an infinite number of devtas. And this is, to share with you, this is something similar to what in the biblical tradition is called the angels. They have large number of angels who have the same kind of functions as devtas. So the development of the fusion as it progresses, it moves from smaller devtas to higher devtas and ultimately to Brahma. And this idea is, again, I am referring to Emil Durkheim. He says that there is an unconscious substrate in organizations like labor unions. What he is calling unconscious substrate, I am saying it's a devta of the labor union. So all the members of the labor union, they are connected with each other at the unconscious level. They create their own devta or they create their own unconscious substrate. And this is how I like to, if you want to use the word prove, that the Brahma is nothing more than the fusion of all the devtas of the universe, who in turn are the fusion of the subsets of the universe. Next slide, please. We come to the next. So far we have discussed the Brahma idea. Now I want to go deeper into this question of devtas. See, I think most of you would be familiar with the 7 chakras in the spinal cord. The importance in this slide is on the left side. I have given the concordance with the 7 needs as described by Abraham Maslow. Now, some writers put the 3 higher needs into one category, but the relevant for us immediately, I will connect this with the whole idea of Trimurti or the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. The 3 chakras, Agya, Anahat, and Manipur, are connected, are typified, I would say, with the cognitive needs, the esteem, and the belonging. So we are, just as Maslow says that human consciousness, human being evolves from lower to higher needs, we say that we evolve from lower to higher chakras. And this concordance then becomes Trimurti. Next slide. Okay. See, the way I am thinking is that we have a large number of persons. Their Manipur Chakra, which is the seat of Vishnu, as per my understanding, is interconnected. But it is not necessary that all the Manipur Chakra of all the individuals is connected with each other. So on the left hand side, you have two persons whose Manipur are connected with a yellow line. Then we have another yellow line, and then we have another yellow line. So these are, I would call, three Vishnus. These are three Vishnus. The two persons on the left have their in Manipur Chakra connected, and this Manipur Chakra, this connection of the Manipur Chakra is personified and given the name Vishnu. So we have three Vishnus. Likewise, we have two Shivas and we have four Brahmas. So Vishuddhi Chakra, Brahma, Anahata Chakra, Shiva, and Manipur Chakra becomes Vishnu. So we have multiple. There are statements in the Puranas, especially, that there are innumerable Brahmas and Vishnus and Shivas. So this is I'm drawing from that idea that there are innumerable of these devtas. Next slide. Now you see, if Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are collective consciousness, and the underlying human beings, animals, plants, whose consciousness is coalescing or fusing to make Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, then those individuals or those particles or those subsets of the universe, they are constantly in a flux. A plant is growing, a human being is dying, an animal is dying. So I find support for this, that Maharishi Arvind says that the collective powers of the consciousness do not provide for them an organized mind and body. It bases them on the group of individuals, develops from them a group mind at a changing yet continuous group body. So there is no discontinuity, because large number of people are coming in and dying and being born and dying and being born. But yet it is continuously evolving. So this concept matches with my understanding of the devta as far as I can. Then Durkheim also says the same thing, that the collective consciousness, now again collective consciousness is devta, is the same in different location, classes and occupations. It connects successive generations rather than changing from one to another. So there is again no discontinuity, and it is connecting, but it is changing in the process of evolution as well. Next slide. Now the last part of my presentation is the whole idea of avatar. What I am able to see is that, look, we have collective consciousness, we have devta. Now if the collective consciousness can descend into an individual, then that individual will be personification of the collective consciousness of that subset. Let's say there are 10 persons in a room singing bhajan. The collective consciousness of those 10 can descend into one person, and sometimes we see then one person will stand up and start dancing or doing something of that type. So it can, consciousness descends, it comes down, or it connects. I don't know whether the word descent is correct. It may be ascent also. An individual can ascend to the collective consciousness, or the collective consciousness can descend. A human being can connect with the devta, or the devta can descend into the human being. The result is the same, and I think it should be interaction both ways. Similarly, now this is, I think, the weakest part of my presentation, which is that in the Western psychology paradigm, I am not able to find a clear understanding of this connection between the individual and the collective. What I did find is that Carl Jung says that the collective archetypes are activated by the libido's descent. Now, libido can be considered, Jung's libido is in some form the consciousness, or the mind, and this, when it descends, it connects with the archetypes, which are the unconscious manifestation or unconscious repository, rather, of the collective consciousness. So this is how, but I like to share that this is, I think, the weakest part of my presentation, which we need to work more. Next slide. So this is the last slide. What I'm proposing is that Brahma is the Western God. It is the same as universal consciousness. It is the fusion of all the collective consciousnesses in the world. Devtas are Western God. They are collective consciousnesses of subset. That subset could be defined in any way whatsoever. An avatar is a person on whom the collective consciousness has descended, and this would include people like Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Ram, Krishna, and so on and so forth. And if we can, if this kind of an understanding is found acceptable, then what I'm saying is that if we can find support, or we can find acceptance for this classification of Brahma, Devta, and Avatara in terms of modern psychology, then we can perhaps explain our Hindu ideas about Brahma, Devta, and these things. So I would like to aim to explain this to the Western religions also, and explain this to them, that the angels in the biblical tradition are the devtas, the prophets or Jesus in the biblical tradition are the avataras, and Brahma is, of course, God. So there has to be a need to build connections, build understanding, and we have to lead the entire global theology towards more scientific understanding of religion. Thank you very much.
Professor Bharat Jhunjhunwala, very illuminating presentation and very comprehensive in many ways. And there may be a lot of agreements and disagreements on these issues. May I now invite some of the commentators who are there. Swami Shyam Chaitanya is the first one to give a comment. Please take 5 to 7 minutes time to give your presentation focused on these issues on Brahman, and the way he started the discussion from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and the notion of creation, and the way the relationship between cosmos, cosmic order, and the social order has been, he has tried to articulate about it. So over to you, Swamiji.
Yeah, thank you. Om Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha Hari Om. So it's a very radical, very innovative reflection on certain ideas which are common to different religions, including our tradition, not one but several traditions within what we refer to as the Hindu fold. But the interesting as well as challenging part of this presentation was that he was not sort of trying to discuss this within a certain theological or philosophical tradition. He was liberally taking from different ideas from different schools of thought. Remaining loyal, I'll limit myself to mentioning about the Advaita Vedanta perspective on this. There were certain moments in which he sort of appeared to be taking a Visishta Advaita position. Sometimes he was taking certain ideas of the Theosophists. He mentioned towards the end certain interesting insights of Sri Aurobindo on the idea of avatara or incarnation. Now, to talk about the Brahman, I just want to clarify this. That those of you who are used to this, using this concept of infinite, we fall trapped in the idea of a mathematical understanding of what's an infinite. You can have infinite number of infinite series in mathematics. You can have continuous series, you can have discontinuous series. But when we are referring to the Brahman, we are not referring to Brahman as infinite in that mathematical sense. Here, in the traditional parlance, the word we use is Desha Kala Vastu Paricheda Sunya. So first thing, it's Sarva Vyapaka. So it is non-local. It's not limited by space and it's not limited by time. The Brahman doesn't have a past or a future. It has only, doesn't have an idea of time. It's Anadi Nidhana. There is no end and there's no beginning. And the Mimamsa philosophy, Indian philosophy, Professor Singh is there, so I'm a little conscious when you're sitting in front of such a well-read, erudite person. But we have 6 Anadis, the Jiva, and in the Ishvara, Jiva, Ishvara, Veda, the Shamanda, all these are without a beginning. Why so? Because the Srishti is not happening for once or twice or thrice or 4 times. They keep happening. Vedanta says this whole story of creation is at best a story to create in us an aspiration to look beyond this creation and focus on the ultimate truth. And that is the radical difference. We don't get stuck with this whole idea of evolution. It started with the Big Bang, what was there before. As many creations, innumerable, infinite. And therefore we have the idea about karma, the sanchita karma, the hard disk, TBs and TBs, what Buddhists talking about is alaya vijnana, the whole lore of actions. You don't even know. You have been animals, birds, maybe devtas. Maybe you don't know what you are. And then we have what matures and gives you this form of this body, called the prarabdha karma, and we have agami karma, and this, I'm not getting into that. So first thing is, it is also not limited by time. And finally, Vastu Paricheda Sunya. So the Brahman is Sajatya, Vijatya, Swagata, Veda, Rahita. You don't have two, like you have a man, you have another man, Sajatya Veda. And then Vijatya Veda. Like, for example, the tree is different from a piece of stone. Vrikshasya Vijatya Veda. Praktra Puspa Phaladita Swagata Veda. So, you have no Swagata Veda, you don't have whole and parts. Brahman had desire to grow, to know. So you are saying Brahman was limited. It was like a child who wanted to grow. The moment you say Brahma wanted, you are having want and Brahman. Advaita takes a beating. It falls flat. So what Advaita Vedanta says is that this is a grand projection. It uses the word Maya to explain this. And this Maya is not independent of what you refer to as Brahman. This is Brahma Ashrita. And Ishvara is a guy who's wearing a cap, a magic cap called Maya. The moment he wears it, he becomes Ishvara. And so Ramakrishna used to all the time say, Jadugar sach hai, jadu sach nahi hai. Jadu to dikhta hai, sach nahi hai. So this whole grand thing that we are seeing is essential in appearance. Not fundamentally real doesn't mean false. It's not false like the son of a barren woman, Bandhyaputra. What do you mean by Bandhyaputra? A woman is barren. How does she have a child? If she has a child, she's not barren. Or Sasavishana, like the rabbit's horns. No, the sansara is not tuchha like that. It's mithya. Mithya is not false. Mithya is anirvachaniya, hard to describe. So this reality is divided into 3 levels. We call it pratibhasika, which appears, empirical reality, vyavaharika, and paramarthika is the ultimate thing. When we are talking about Brahman as one, we are not denying samsara and its multiplicity, but we are saying that the fundamental reality of all this is not what is apparent. And therefore, the Vedanti will say, Jagan Mithya. Why? Drishyatvat, because it appears. Can you give me an example? Swapnavat. Don't you see dreams? Is that real? so is the samsara. Is not denying the samsara. A lot of people think Brahma Satya Jagana Mithya means it's all false. No. It essentially means that we have to transcend what we are seeing around us, which appears as real, traps us. Just imagine. And there is one beautiful video which is making rounds in social media. You'd find that there's this tiny girl sitting, not tiny girl, a beautiful young woman sitting on a lawn in a Google office, and then the camera is focusing and slowly it goes on, and you see the whole galaxy. You don't see it, depends on the focal length. Similarly, what we see around us depends on what focal length of our perception we're using. Somebody is stuck with political ideology, somebody is stuck with gender issues, somebody is stuck with nature, somebody is stuck with God. Depends on where you are looking at, what you are looking for. So now, the second one is causality. Now this causality doesn't mean Brahman is becoming something. That is called Brahma Parinama Vada. That Brahman is becoming something. No, Brahman doesn't become anything. It's Niskala Nirvikara. Achaloyam Sanatana. Bhagavan says about himself. Then how do you say this whole creation? Where did it come out? It comes out of our own karmas, our own perceptions, our own avidya, our own ignorance. Not in that particular Western philosophical sense, ignorance. Ignorance here is a predicament. It's a philosophical. It's about our being, the whole existence, the way we are. And we tend to see it the way we try to see it, and we have to sort of, I sometimes find that there's a lot of interesting similarity between what Karl Marx talks about in German ideology and what Vedanta says. We are unable to understand that reality is inverted. Both Karl Marx and Vedanta say this. The reality appears inverted. We cannot grasp it. We need hard work. And what is that? That is vichara. Vite jnanam no mukhya. Without jnana, there is no liberation. There is no transcendence. You might do upasana, that's for antakarana shuddhi. You might do a lot of good work, that is for purification of your mental consciousness. Na bala hinena labhya. We cannot get it. It's not meant for the weak. So a theistic version of Vedanta or religion, where there's a God who is acting, who's going to help you, there's an avatara, that's one way of thinking. But Advaita Vedanta is radical, it's very scientific, it's very rational. It doesn't demean devotion, it doesn't reject and dismiss devotion, but it says that these are intermediate levels of engagement with a process of transformation, but you have to really go thousands of miles ahead of these small practices. You have to open your consciousness to the radical possibility of seeing that truth. Where you begin to see it, you will cease to exist. This will be only pure consciousness. The perceiver, the perception, the perceived, they all become Chaitanya eva, Satchidananda Swarupa. And therefore, I don't want to sort of, because, so everything is Chaitanya. And these devatas and all, whether it's one God or many gods, the Vedanti has no problem. Is there a Jesus? Is there Allah? Why not? Vedanta smiles. Names and forms. You create names and forms depending on your level of ignorance or your level of understanding. There's not a problem. Should I worship him or her? Please do. But don't stop there. The journey is very long. You have to move ahead and reflect and figure out who you are. And whatever you see is not you. Whatever you see is not you. Whatever belongs to you is not you. And that Drik Chaitanya alone is real. Everything else is false. That is what. And so, when you bring in the idea of vivarta, you slowly lose interest in this whole theory about parinama. Then you lose interest in the details of it. However, what I found very interesting about Sri Jhunjhunwala's paper was this, that he is trying to figure out ways in which we can relate to each other, we can make sense of group minds, collective consciousness. You know, you have nations, you have ethnicities. He's trying to make sense of it. Sri Aurobindo has done pioneering work on it in the Life Divine, and he has meditated on it. There are some interesting ways in which we could reflect on it because we are passing through a difficult time. Vedanta is like an atom bomb, it's like an atom bomb. But you need arrows, you need cannons, you need several things to fight a war. So you need different solutions, you need different heuristic devices, analytical devices to be able to reflect on what's going on all around you. So all these explanations are very relevant. The problem is too many ideas and theories were kind of packed into one single paper. So there was creationism, then there is this Anahata Chakra, the devtas, the dialogue between Gargi and Yajnavalkya. I just wanted to clarify that point because there is some misunderstanding. When Gargi is asking, what is the foundation of water? He says, Vayu. What is the foundation of where does the air stop? He says, in Akasha. Then he goes on and finally says that all of this is established in the Brahmaloka. He says, then where is Brahmaloka established? He says, you're asking too much. What he's trying to say is, and Shankaracharya clarifies this is agamagamya, na anumanikam. You cannot do inferential analysis of it. Don't indulge in logic here. As Sri Aurobindo says beautifully in The Secret of the Vedas are not giving you a description of what happened. And that is what the German Indologists did. They tried to interpret Vedas, thinking this is a body of literature. That is how they sort of came out with whatever they wanted to. Whereas the Vedas are giving certain very cryptic insights. The idea is to meditate on those insights. And the process of meditation, we undergo transformation at the level of our consciousness. And that is what we refer to as nididhyasana. It can be an unending process. I like to stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Erudite person like Professor Singh, I hope he'll conclude and add a few things in there.
Yeah, of course. They will do it. May I suggest that let all the three respondents give their views, and then Professor Jhunjhunwala will respond to it, and then I'll take a couple of questions if the time is there. Otherwise, in the chat pod, questions are coming up. So I'll gradually. May I now invite Dr. Saurabh Todaria to give the reflection, maybe 5-7 minutes. Saurabh, yeah, all right.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. And it's so heartening to be with my teachers here, Professor Singh, Professor Manindra Thakur, who are over here. And this has been a very fascinating talk, and the framework was very wide. And so basically, I will take the 2-3 main points here. One is the very interesting philosophical problem which is trying to resolve in the paper, like the tension between the unity and the multiplicity. And that he is using basically the basic Upanishad quote, like how the one has become the many. Now, interesting framework he has also taken from the neuroscientist Tonoi, where the Tonoi, he mentioned the Tonoi saying that the result is always more than the sum. Actually, the parts are always bigger than the whole. Now, Tonoi gives very interesting framework which is called as the IIT Integrated Information Theory. What does he mean that by this? That in a very simple term, that how do we know that the consciousness exists if any element is able to process the information, and not only able to process the information, also able to integrate it. Now, by which what Tonoi does, he says then we can induce the consciousness to each and every aspect of the universe, which paves the way for the panpsychism, that the consciousnness can be found in each and every particle. And on this kind of the framework, Bharat Jhunjhunwala also creates a kind of a metaphysical framework that how this multiplicity can be accounted by making that by calling each and every element, each and every particle as conscious. It needs not to be self-conscious, but the consciousness can be found there. So this aspect is very much similar what I found in the history of philosophy with the Kashmiri Shaivism, but the Kashmiri Shaivism talks about when it resolves the tension between the one and many by saying that the activity or the Kriya Shakti is the essential part of the Shiva. So word or the creation is not something which is illusion, which is away from the Shiva, but it is the manifestation of the divine joy of Shiva, because Shiva wants to enjoy itself. So it converts itself it transforms itself into the matter in the various kind of the multiplicity, which is the Kriya Shakti of the Shiva, and that is where the creation and the creator and the Shakti and the consciousness cannot be distinguished. So this is so I find philosophically his approach more similar to the Kashmiri Shaivism. And one of the interesting and also problematic thing which I have found is in the conception of avatara. So where he talks about the avatara more in terms of the Moses, Jesus and all that. But in the Hindu tradition and the Indian, especially in the Vaishnavite tradition, we see the avatara, there is an essential part of the avatara is the Leela. So avatara is not something which only descends, but it invariably, it has the divine play, which is called Leela. And in the Indian Vaishnava tradition, especially in the Rup Jivan Goswami, in the aesthetics of the Rup Jivan Goswami, he basically talks that that avatara is also the source of a rasa, source of the aesthetic joy. And this aesthetic joy cannot only be experienced in the theater and the performances, but this aesthetic rasa can also be experienced in the divine play, and they, according to their interpretation, that Krishna is that character which has that kind of the range, that has that kind of the characteristics or the fullness, which can actually produce that kind of the rasa. So in Indian tradition, whenever we talk about the avatara, it is just not about the descent, it is also about the leela, how much aesthetic joy it can produce by the reflection on the characters and the various kind of divine acts of that. So how would you see that? So that's all. This is from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saurabh. And now we are with Mr. Varun. If he can just take up some time and give some reflection on it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I think it was a complex paper with many systems of thoughts coming together and fused. I feel that because there is lot is being discussed in this paper, I would like to focus on 2 or 3 aspects of it. First of all, I feel that Professor Jhunjhunwala is trying to build a framework which is metaphysical in nature, and a frame of system which is sort of totalized in some sense, which has phenomenological aspects to it as well as a deep metaphysics to it. I think this is an interesting framework, and I also subscribe to a totalized ontology where both phenomenology, which is basically experiential aspects, and a metaphysical abstraction are part of the same system. But I feel that in this paper, the phenomenological aspect has been sort of ignored, and a lot of abstraction and rational analysis has been done, which is somewhat interesting. I like that framework. But when you see people right now working in sort of comparative philosophy, especially the likes of Ivan Thompson and Michel Bidball and others, they are trying to argue that Indian tradition is primarily phenomenological. It is grounded in experience, and this kind of analysis is basically an objectification of some sort, which is basically a scientific ontology. I don't know whether I agree with Ivan Thompson's analysis. I feel that it is important to incorporate the elements of metaphysics, because when you say a system, a comprehensive system, when you call a system comprehensive, system of thought comprehensive, then it, in my understanding, it must incorporate both phenomenological concerns as well as a metaphysical. But there has been other interpretations. Secondly, what I like about is that Professor Jhunjhunwala has given reference to very interesting neuroscientific and physical physicist theory. Especially, I should mention Stuart Hameroff and Penrose's work, which he has incorporated, and then try to bring into dialogue the traditions that he has mentioned, especially the Indic traditions and the conception of Brahma. But there has a lot of been confusion here. A lot of confusion is there because panpsychism fundamentally is not a monolith. panpsychism incorporates very different ideas. It encapsulates many different conceptions. For instance, there can be something called micro panpsychism, which in my understanding, Professor Jhunjhunwala is trying to espouse that there are different fundamental entities which are in itself conscious, and they somehow fuse and form a Brahma, which is collective conscious. But I feel that a kind of panpsychism that resonates more with Indic ontology is something called cosmopsychism, which I don't think he has mentioned. Now, this cosmopsychism is basically that there is one entity, one universal entity, and that one universal entity individuates into fundamental entity. So it's like upsiding it down, like it's a different methodology, inverting the reductionist methodology to a holistic, from a reductionist to a holistic perspective, where you start with one and then that one differentiates into simpler forms. You start with a complex entity and then you differentiate into the singular entities, rather than starting with reductionist elements. So I feel that a cosmopsychist interpretation of panpsychism, as being given by the likes of Itai, Shani and others, is more fruitful to understand Indian philosophies and Indian ontologies. Apart from that, I feel a lot of interesting comparison has been done by the likes of Bernardo Kastrop and others, who are trying to interpret Indian philosophy, especially Advait Vedant, in an idealist interpretation. They're trying to argue that it is a consciousness only ontology. It's not panpsychism, because panpsychism is at its core is materialistic, because it argues that matter and mind are inextricably linked. So it has a more material component to it, and matter and mind should be seen as one entity. There is no differentiation. And in my understanding, I like panpsychism because it gives due importance to the material entity. It does not argue that it's all Maya, it's all illusion, which idealist ontologies argue for. And that is what I liked about Jhunjhunwala's ideas, because in conclusion, Professor Jhunjhunwala has argued that a very interesting point and a very important point in my understanding. He has argued Brahma has desires. Brahma should not be seen as an entity which is devoid of desires, as argued by Shankaracharya. That is a very vital point. Why I'm calling it a very vital point? Because when you say Brahma has desire and Brahma is real and it's not Jagat, Brahm Satya and Jagat Mithya, it argues for a position where you take material reality, where you take economics seriously, where you take human suffering seriously. So it's not that it's just a conscious process, or human suffering is, you can completely evade it, you can get rid of human suffering through thinking only. You have to take matter seriously. So I feel panpsychist ontology, as being espoused by Professor Jhunjhunwala, has a lot of philosophical cum political implications also, because we know that materialism is an ontology that is hugely problematic, because first of all, it is reductionist. You cannot have a materialist ontology which is not reductionist. There are Marxists who argue that their materialism is dialectical, but I don't understand that when it comes to the fundamental debate between what is fundamental, is it matter or mind. Marxists are very insightful in that, but panpsychists, I feel, are more perceptive in that, because they give due emphasis to both mind as well as matter, and tries to argue for a position where you take material, economic, body seriously, without reducing everything to the phenomenological aspect, which many phenomenologists are trying to do. So I think that is the most important aspect of your paper, that you are somehow trying to intrinsically give a political component or an ethical component to it, which some of the panpsychists, for instance, I should mention Philip Goff's recent work, where he's trying to argue that moral truth can have an objective conception. So moral truth is not just are not just part of the relativistic conception where you have your own moral truth, I have my own moral truth. Moral truth can also have an objective truth value, like mathematical truths, and it is tuned with panpsychist ontology. Panpsychist ontology gives that space where morality or ethics is seen as universal and it is seen as real. It's not like Platonic or Aristotelian conception, which is teleological and which is idealist. So in that sense, I appreciate the work, and it's a very, I would say, interesting and a thought-provoking analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You have exploded like anything. I didn't know about it. So many ideas you have. So may I request Professor Jhunjhunwala to respond to these questions in just maybe around 5 to 10 minutes time? Not necessarily that, because comments have come from different viewpoints, and everybody has her own commitments, kind of a thing. So the questions he thinks are very relevant to the development of his own thesis. So, and whatever misunderstanding is there, he can respond to it. Because taking up completely Advait Vedantin perspective or Saivite perspective, or this cosmopsychism kind of a thing, so that will create a lot of problems in the course of development. So he should stick to his own viewpoints and respond to it the way he wants to respond to it. Professor Jhunjhunwala, over to you now.
The fundamental point that Swamiji and Saurabh Todaria both made was of Mayavad and Leela. My position is very clear. Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam. I simply think that Jagat Mithya does not work. It was a strategic point made by Sri Shankaracharya, whom I venerate, but it was not a philosophical position. वो सिर्फ इसलिए कहा गया था so that the people got disengaged from the material desires and connected to the Brahma, but it did not mean Jagat Mithya in any way whatsoever. And I think that is the fundamental departure I am making, and I am relying on Chandogya Upanishad and other Upanishads. उसमें साफ लिखा है कि Brahma has pure desires. Brahma शब्द का मतलब है it grows. So how will it grow when it has no desires? So I think there is a fundamental need to reconsider this whole concept of Maya, and part of that Maya is Leela. So I don't think the idea of Leela works. I don't think the idea of Leela works. I think these are strategic teachings by Hindu sages to help people in a particular way. But I am not a sage. I am not here to help people or do anything. But I think we really need to reconsider this whole. I think that is the way that we have to move forward. The second point I would say is that the Swamiji tried to make some distinctions. For example, that Brahma anadi hai. Of course, then universal consciousness bhi anadi hai. Where is the distinction? आप बोलते हैं कि ब्रह्म भेद रहित है, तो if the universal consciousness is fused together, तो उसमें भेद कहाँ है? There is no भेद in universal consciousness either. So we are not understanding the concept of universal consciousness, where it is a unified universal consciousness. It is not segmented, and therefore the objections that Swamiji made are, to my mind, not tenable at all. I mean, it is not tenable. The idea of Shiva, I'll go. Now the point that Varun made, I have read something about phenomenology. I read Edmund Husserl, how do you pronounce it? But I'm not very erudite at phenomenology. I think the idea that, you see, we are like the elephant and the 5 blind men. When you say that material is first, and when you say psyche is first, psyche is first, I think we are into that kind of a situation. I had given that quote where that from him Brahma was born, and from Brahma Viraj was born, and something of that type. So how do you distinguish? I mean, it's your perspective. If you want, you can say Brahma se Viraj hua. If you want, you can say Viraj se Brahma hua. I think this is because our minds are not grasping the true unity of matter and consciousness. अगर हम उस matter और consciousness की unity को समझ सकें, and we expand our mind, I think it does not work at the level of mind at all. It has to be done at the level of meditation. जब आप अपना unconscious से जब आप universal consciousness से connect करते हैं, then you can understand. जैसे एक बार मेरी पूरी शंकराचार्य निश्चलानंद जी से बात हुई, तो उन्होंने कहा मैं समुद्र से बात करता हूँ. I like that. तो इसका मतलब हुआ कि that the sea consciousness and Shankaracharya's consciousness, they could interconnect. And where is the point of debating that whether C consciousness came first or the Shankaracharya consciousness came first? So I think we are reducing the grand totality into segmented parts and creating unnecessary divisions between them. I think I agree with Varun that panpsychism is not a monolith. Look, I am not a philosopher. Please grant me that freedom to say that I am not a philosopher. I have not read so many people that you people have read. But that's not the point. The point is, how do we explain biblical religions, Western psychology to the Hindu mind, and Hindu thinking to the Western mind? That is my question. Ultimately what we will have to do that there are certain components of the Western psychology and certain components of the Hindu thinking. If we can build bridges on those components, then the critiques that those components have with respect to the others automatically become applicable. So instead of getting into the various divisions of panpsychism and Advaita and Vishishtadvaita and this, honestly, if you ask me, I don't even understand what the 6 systems of Hindu philosophy are. मैं Vishishtadvaita को तो मैं explain में नहीं कर पाऊंगा. But I find it irrelevant. मुझे बेकार लगता है क्योंकि it does not explain how the Western psychology, how the biblical religions, how Quran, how Bible, how God, how all these people are thinking about the world and how we interact with them. You see, the challenge before us is not to do backbiting about Vishishtadvaita and Dvaita and all these things. The challenge before us, how to comprehend modern science in Hindu terms and explain Hindu terms or Hindu thinking to the modern science and help evolve the modern science. My target is not Hinduism. My target is the Western thinker whom I want to understand and evolve by understanding Hindu concept. So I think we should not get into this backbiting and bickering on.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Jhunjhunwala. So
much
may I now
bigger
invite
challenge
Professor...
before us. And with these words, sorry if I've said something.
Yeah, I can understand. Professor Maninder Thakur, if he wants to say something. Then we have Professor Akhlaq Ahmad. He has sent the question in the chat bot also, but he can make use of the open platform. So if he wants to say something, Professor Akhlaq.
Thank you. I just wanted to know that since I have read about Wahdatul Wajud, that is a philosophy in Sufi tradition, and that is very similar to somehow, though it is a little different also, to Advait. So the way Professor Jhunjhunwala explained Brahma, the ultimate consciousness. So I just wanted to know, could you please enlighten us if there is any similarity between the philosophy of Advait, or it can be explanatory to each other, or if there is some point of which can be similar to what you explain in.
May I suggest that he can collect the questions and respond to it at the end of it, just for the sake of we can save some time with that exercise. So is there anybody else before I invite Professor Maninder Thakur? Okay, now Professor Thakur, you can just
Dev Pathak wants to say something. This was wonderful listening to Professor Jhunjhunwala. It is exciting paper. I also had a chance to take a cursory look before attending the lecture. and the interventions by Satya Mishra ji, Saurav, Varun, furthermore illuminated the whole discourse. There are a lot of currents and counter currents. It's very enriching. मुझे जो मेरा जो दिमाग अटक गया एक चीज पर जाकर पूरे प्रेजेंटेशन में, बहुत सारी चीजों को तो ऑलरेडी आप लोग उठा चुके हैं, अद्वैत से संबंधित बहुत सारे प्रश्न और माया लीला का जो आइडिया है वो सब तो हो ही चुका है. But there is one thing where I am still stuck, and I am not asking any question, but probably it can be taken up as some kind of observation, that this whole parallel that is being drawn between collective unconscious, the Jungian collective unconscious, and Durkheimian collective consciousness. वो जो ये parallel थोड़ा सा अटपटा है, जो मैंने those who would be familiar with the conceptual intricacies of Durkheimian collective consciousness and Jungian collective unconscious, particularly in relation with the idea of archetype, which is more at mythological level, primeval level. तो वो जो parallel जो draw हो रहा है ना, तो वहाँ that is where I felt it's probably getting somewhere else, and that kind of parallel allows one to get into what Varun was apprehensive of, that psychic universalism. Probably there has to be some other kind of route to get into the details of the kind which Professor Jhunjhunwala was trying to draw our attention to. वो क्या हो सकता है? I am personally I have been in search of that particular language, that grammar, which can allow us to talk about some of these questions without unnecessarily getting embroiled in this whole, necessity to draw a parallel. For example, when Sri Aurobindo was writing about psychic structure, he did not get into this business of teaching the rest of the world some kind of modern science through these materials. Though he was responding to, at that point in time, a very Freudian kind of idea of psyche. But then वो कितना confidently, जैसे श्री औरबिंदो ने एक बहुत ही confident language set किया, तो कहीं ना कहीं वो पता नहीं छूट गया. अगर गिरीन्द्र शेखर बोस के ही स्टाइल में साइकोएनालिसिस करना है, मॉडर्न साइकोएनालिसिस, और then in that style one has to talk about some of these mythological, or if you want to say canonical, old ancient canonical ideas, तो मुझे लगता है that language has to be explored. Otherwise ये जो हमारे बहुत सारे students भी ये लोग करते हैं कि वो conceptual parallel draw करते हैं, तो वो कई बार exciting तो हो सकता है, लेकिन it also gets lost.
Yeah, thank you very much. Kaustav, you want to say something?
Yes, Professor Raghavendra Singh, thank you, and all of us, and particularly Professor Jhunjhunwala. I am new to this seminar, and one of the things, and in fact I have been taking notes of all the comments and discussions, and in one of his expositions he had stated that God is a collective consciousness, and to my mind I think it is basically a divine vibrations, because if you take up the multiplicity of atoms, they combine into molecules, and the multiplicity of the atomic vibrations leading to molecules is a kind of vibration that leads to matter. So if you want to go near to God, I think you have to have that kind of feeling to be one with God. In fact, you need to have divine vibrations, and that's why I think why the Shema Israel, that is the holiest of the holy prayers in Judaism, starts something like this in Deuteronomy part 1. Ve'afta Adonai Elohecha b'kol levavecha uvkol nafshecha uvkol meodecha. That is, you have to love God with all your heart, with all your strength, and with all your soul. And it is something which is very binding, and I think it comes from a kind of vibration, and which is very akin to the kind of philosophy we have in Hinduism. Thank you very much, and this was my observation.
Thank you very much. So is there anybody else before I invite Professor Manin Thakur? I think nobody. So, okay, Professor Manin Thakur, you can just briefly give something.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Jhunjhunwala. Thanks for being part of our group. And actually, you have initiated a discussion which will probably be carried on.
I think 2-3 points. One, that I'm not an expert on it. We are trying to look for a framework which might allow a dialogue, the concern that you have, between different intellectual traditions. But like Professor Pathak, I'm also not sure what kind of frame should we evolve within which such dialogue could take place. One frame seems to be comparative philosophy, which sometimes look to be very crude, like this is here, this is there. And in that, what we lose actually is the frame of the system itself. So if the frame of the system is broken, and then certain ideas are taken from two different frames, then outside their own frames, how do they interact? I'm not sure of it. The kind of anxiety that Satya has, I think that is somewhere I'm not very confident that despite our best of the concerns, we actually be able to create that dialogue. I mean, the framework that you have evolved, I feel very comfortable with that. Maybe for the reason that I have least exposure of a great intellectual tradition. So I'm feeling, as a social scientist, I'm feeling very comfortable that there is a kind of parallel collective consciousness, individual consciousness, universal consciousness, and then the interaction between that. Little bit of Jung that I read confirms this kind of model to handle the complexity of consciousness. But then I think there is something missing there. Like I'm somewhere where you said that I'm not sure what is the Viraj versus universal consciousness, what is the interaction, whether one is prior or the other. I think we can explain that in terms of a whole-part relationship, that there is a signature of whole on the part and there's signature of part on the whole, and whole is constantly evolving, and this question of which is prior to which becomes irrelevant. Then there is a kind of constant dialogue going on. So maybe these things we can bring here and connect. But when Satya says that mithya does not mean untrue, which is a very important point, it only means that incomprehensible, probably. So that is where then everything breaks down. I think what Varun is suggesting, that and I and Varun have long debate about it, and now probably he is taking this position, and first time I'm hearing that panpsychism is taking cognizance of the material reality, which then connects that with other frame for social scientists easily. But then if that is true, then this collective consciousness, the universal consciousness and the dynamics of universal consciousness, how much is that dependent on the material reality? Is there a dialectics between the two? Is that what is determinant? Or at some stage, this universal consciousness becomes autonomous? And as we were discussing about Vigyan Vairav, that it talks about another ontology, which is an independent or another layer of the ontology. So consciousness is another layer of ontology, where one can reach only by experience, not by, or what Professor Kaustubh Chakravarti said, the divine vibration. And that is not through logic. We can't explain it. It is something beyond that. In that realm, when we reach, then we lose connection with the ground. Is that true? So that is what I think I'm quite puzzled with. But largely speaking, let me just conclude in one line, that I think in Indian tradition there are three kinds of dialogue. One is between the experts. One is expert of one domain and the experts of other domain. And third is between the experts of the common people. So I think in this discussion, we try to bring all three kinds of people together. And therefore, it became a complex debate, I'm sure. But that is where the puzzle could be solved, I guess. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. Professor Bharat Jhunjhunwala, you can take a few minutes to respond to these questions.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. You see, I think there is only one crucial question.
Yeah.
I was a Marxist in my youth. I still am, but now I'm more philosophical rather than a practical Marxist.
Yeah.
You see, what Marx did was he synthesized French socialism, German idealism, and English political economy. Now, if you look back, he did not accept either one of the three totally. When you are fusing different traditions, you have to take the kernel of those traditions or some element of those traditions, and then alone you can fuse. You can never fuse the complete tradition. Because if the complete tradition could be fused, then it would already have been fused and there would be no distinction between the two. So I would say, as I expressed in my presentation also, that I'm not sure about certain things. So there is a sense of unease or void or uncertainty. But the way forward is not to look at the uncertainty, but to look at the positive. So if we start looking at the points at which we join together, then the disagreements or the distinctions will kind of fade away. I mean, no one will put Hegelian idealism with Ricardian economics or political economy, but Marx did it, and he criticized both in certain sense and accepted both. So I think that is the kind of model that we have to use to develop a new paradigm. The new paradigm will not come by integrating whole of all traditions. It will come by integrating parts of these traditions, and I feel that that is where we are moving. The core question is, what is Brahma? And I really feel that the concept of universal consciousness that matches with what Swamiji had said. I could not see any difference between what Swamiji's concept of Brahma was and what my concept of universal consciousness was. So we have to be little open to the different streams, take different parts of different streams, take different kernels from different streams, and then integrate. Then we have to move forward. You see, the challenge is not debating amongst ourselves and saying, like Shankaracharya ne Mandan Mishra ko hara diya. So what did it achieve? That is not the target. That is not the challenge before us. Our challenge is to help evolution of mankind's understanding of God and world. That is where we should focus, and these differences will pale away. That is how I feel. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And it's indeed has been a very enlightening evening for me. So many views, comments, and thesis, counter thesis, everything has emerged. And I disagree with only one point what Professor Jhunjhunwala has said when he said that he is not a philosopher. So, in fact, everything not philosophy, but everything can be philosophized. If you have a position and you have a counter position and you can just create some kind of contestation and find some kind of discrepancy in the concepts, that means you are philosophizing. And if you are philosophizing, then you are a philosopher. So I see that act of philosophizing is very much there in you. And if you say that you are not a philosopher, then none of us are philosophers. In fact, it is there, very much there. Sir, accept it that you are a philosopher. And you have taken a philosophical positions very smoothly. And let me just submit at least 3 or 4 issues which have just emerged out of it. And I will change the nomenclature a little bit of it, and then I'll come back to the original position of it. So I feel that the major issue at discussion today is how do we understand reality? If we look at the dictionary meaning of it, it says that reality exists as a fact or a thing without imagination and imitations. But if we look at the Indian way of understanding reality, then it means Satya, Vastava, Yathartha, Purusartha, Paramartha, Sajatiya, Vijatiya, Swagata, Bheda, Rahita. It's very broad connotation. And within this broad connotation, psychology also comes because it's a part and parcel of it, of the notion of whole reality. So this is the first thing, and cosmology is of course another way of entering into the same kind of a domain. And there, and what Professor Jhunjhunwala has done, that he has taken up a very epistemological way of doing it, moving from the singularity, and then finding out some kind of anomaly between one and many. And this has been a big problem, even in the Greek philosophy also. The basic problem which Socrates and Plato had faced was how to resolve the problem relationship between one and many. And they found that perhaps universal concept or definition can resolve this problem. So in case of India, so you have to look at the relationship between one and many in terms of the growth, development, some kind of process element has to move into it. So because of which there is a, if we take up desire in the crude sense of the term, like an agent is having a desire, I desire X, that will be one thing. But if the Brahman is, which is some kind of an energy, and it has to expand, it has to grow, but it has to grow in an orderly manner. This becomes a different way of articulation of it, where singularity is from the epistemic point of view, but from the cosmology point of view, there is no singularity. It's a process which is going on. As an agent, I can say this is singular, but as the cosmic being, we cannot say that this is singular. Look at the example which we find in the Nasadeya Sukta, where unmanifest has been given prominence over the manifest world. So, in every respect, unmanifest supersedes the manifest world. And they have used a particular logic to prove it. And towards the end of it, the Rishi Dirghatamas, he is also like, any other Rishis, particularly like a philosopher. He says that I do not know, you do not know, maybe God knows, maybe God also doesn't know. Only a philosopher can dare to speak like this, because God is also later creation. So who is talking about the gods? These 33 crores of gods, and these are kotis, in fact. Crore is not the term, actually. So 33 koti, and they are in the groups. They have been organized in various groups. Rudras are there, Adityas are there, and there is a group, and it's a kind of community kind of a thing, grouping. The difference is only of the degrees, but it has got nothing to do with the crore element. It can be counted, their names are there, and it can be counted. So koti here has this kind of a connotation. And then apart from the Nasadeya Sukta, we
does
also
koti mean category? Koti means what, category or
categories?
What?
Categories, yeah.
Categories, okay.
Categories only, and not 1 crore kind of a thing, or 33 crores of gods and goddesses. That's a Sanskrit term has these kind of misinterpretations. The translations are correct, but not contextual, so it doesn't fit into that. Anyway, so Nasadeya Sukta is one such illustration. Then we have the concept of in the Rig Veda and also in Sankhya philosophy, we have the concept of inverted tree, in which the trunk, the roots are somewhere in the unmanifest. Trunks, branches, fruits, tree, and everything, leaves, and everything is in this world. So the Moola Prakriti and Prakriti. Yeah. So this is another expression of that kind of, it's very metaphoric, but it is suggestive in a certain manner. But everything becomes very clear when we come to the notion of ritas. So Panch Mahabhutas. And there, surprisingly, there is one statement which the Rishi has said in the course of ritas, that it is the Purush who can violate the ritas. So it is the dharma of the Purush to protect the ritas, because nature is a gift from the ritas. And we human beings have a, Saurabh comes from the Himalayas, so he knows how much pollution we have created there. And to, destroy the, the gift of ritas, the nature, which is there. So the role of human being is to protect the ritas so that they are in harmony with the ritas, with the Mula Prakriti, and also with the, some kind of a thesis which is before us. And the important thing which comes up with the Professor Jhunjhunwala's presentation is that when we move from this singularity, and that is singularity has an urge to multiply itself, to unfold itself, to unconceal itself. So this unconcealing kind of, energy which is there in the singularity is something which is very profound. And in very many ways, it has been done. And sometimes in a very mystical manner also, it has been done. And I'll just share a brief story with Swami Vivekananda, and then I'll stop. So Vivekananda, he had one servant in his matha, in the Ramakrishna mission matha kind of a thing. His name was Bholanath, and he used to worship many gods. So Vivekananda, what is this nonsense you are doing? Why don't you stop all these things? And then that fellow was not listening to it. He said, no, maybe the real God is here, maybe the real God is there. So I will worship everybody, every God kind of a thing. And Ramakrishna Paramahansa has found in the Kali, I will find it somewhere else also. So he kept on, he did not listen to Vivekananda. But when Vivekananda was, I don't know if it was the Samadhi, maybe Swamiji can help me to understand it, but maybe it was a very high psychic experience which Vivekananda had, in which, he developed so much of energy that without him saying that man, Bholanath, to stop worshipping different gods, Bholanath himself started throwing away all the, murtis and everything else. So sometimes it happens at the deep psychic experience, people can motivate others to work, which is there somewhere hidden deep inside in the mind. Sri Aurobindo used to do it very profoundly. There are so many such illustrations in Sri Aurobindo's case also. So this meditative experience through which one can see the, collective consciousness coming up. So you can take the model from Jung or Durkheim, and to understand the social reality, that from the individual we go to the collective, and then the collective is transmitted to the next generation, to the next tradition, and so on. It keeps on going on, going on. But this is another kind of an issue which is very comprehensive. So towards the end, as in the question answer session, he took up a very profound statement from Karl Marx, the three sources of his philosophical upbringing: the German ideology, the French socialism, and the British political economy. And some of the parts which are there, which could be taken up as important, but broadly it came in reaction with what Hegel had said, that Prussian state or capitalism is a state of society which can solve all the problems. But Marx said that no, in Prussian state there is alienation which cannot be solved within the kind of structure, base and superstructure they have. So he started proposing the critique. And of course, there is a messianic tradition also. Theological lineage is also very profoundly there, both in Hegel and Marx, because paradise, loss of paradise, and then the day of the judgment. So in Marxism, there is messianism without Messiah. So because he looks forward, there is utopian element into it, future element, because the present is full of contradictions, alienation, and everything else. And it has to be, replaced at a higher level. So different parts can all be taken together in order to reach to another stage, which may again raise certain questions. And this is a process which keeps on going. That's why Brahman is not going to an end at any point of time. Let there be pralaya and vilaya and everything. These are the series of events which will keep on happening, but it will continuously keep on, evolve, developing itself, growing and developing. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And now over to you, Shailja.
Thank you, sir. Thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you, foundation that has been very much forward to bring, as Sir said, common people and intellectuals and experts all together in one domain. In case if you're interested for further seminars and conferences, you can kindly drop your email ID in the comment box. Otherwise, we'll end the session for good, sir.
Can I make a suggestion to Maninderji? Maninderji, can we have Varun make a presentation next time? I want to listen to him on these 2-3 contemporary phenomenological approaches and panpsychism, and he mentioned some interesting ideas. So why can't we have him? Why can't we have him to talk about it? Yeah.
Definitely. We have Swami Om Prakash also with us, who has been
I saw him. It will be wonderful to have him. So let's have you plan the next talk where Varunji could bring in his discussions, and then
Sure. No, I was mentioning that Swami Om Prakash has been quite instrumental in initiating this idea that we should have a kind of group to discuss the idea of consciousness, and Rishikesh dialogue on.
I just wanted to remind all of you that today is the Tithi Puja of Swami Vivekananda, so it's a very auspicious occasion.
Oh,
thank you all.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we'll talk about it, Satya. We'll discuss it.
Thank you everybody. Goodbye.
And please, thank you, Professor Jhunjhunwala. Thank you very much. Thanks for connecting with us. And I'll get back to you on detailed program.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the video. Do like and share our video. For more seminars and talk, please subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, comment on the video and don't forget to press the bell icon for future updates.